Welcome to Ansakari. We will be covering today the newspaper edition of 5th of August. To begin with, the Bangladesh Cricket Board has officially requested the ICC to shift its T20 World Cup fixtures from India to co-host Sri Lanka. It has cited growing concerns regarding safety and security of its contingent. Following the request, ICC Chairman Jay Shah has initiated process of drawing up a fresh schedule. So this comes after a hindrance in the Indo-Bangladeshi relationships and also in the cricketing domain after BCCI directed the IPL franchise KKR to release Mustafizur Rahman from its camp. So this is seen as a tit for tat move from the BCB. This has also raised concerns over mixing of politics with sports. Mr. Shashi Tharoor in his article expressed grave concern. He has commented that Bangladesh is not to be compared with Pakistan. Bangladesh was a reliable partner. Its history we can trace a larger than life relationship of brotherhood and shared history from its inception in 1971. Bangladesh, though moving from a tumultuous period, its sovereignty must be respected, and the Indian government should try to resolve the differences with the current regime and try to persuade our shared concerns. Moving on, nanobots and cancer treatment. Mr. Dr. Ghosh, a professor at the Indian Institute of Science, explores the future feasibility of nanobots while while battling cancer. Cancer therapies are limited by a challenge of delivering medicines deep inside tumors while sparing healthy tissue, a barrier that must overcome to realize the promise of targeted and personalized medicine. Uh, Therapies including chemotherapy are they do try to address the problem of killing the tumor, but alongside harming the tumor, they um, also harm the healthy tissues of the body. That's why it is it comes at a certain disadvantage, like uh, decremental health and falling of hair and other complications arise due to these therapies. So nanobots comes as a alternative that are much much better while treating cancer. So what are nanobots to begin with? Medical nanobots are microscopic robots designed to navigate biological environments, deliver drugs directly to tumors, and distinguish cancerous tissue from healthy cells. So, cancer treatment using magnetic nanobots, they travel through blood, dense tissues, and cells. The nanobot that the IISc is developing mimics the movement of bacteria with a little helix-shaped tail. It functions like a propeller, the boat, or corkscrew as they travel through different media. As the helix turns, the object moves forward like a coiled spring. So these nanobots function as nanoswimmers and effectively become a delivery truck to deliver the drugs to the targeted issue. This prevents healthy tissue from getting embroiled in these harmful drugs that target the growth of the tumor or the cancerous cell. So uh, the nanobots can also be used as beacon to light up during an MRI, helping the oncosurgeon pinpoint the tumor and the cancerous cells. Nanobots have been very efficient on ovarian and breast cancer cells, particularly in deep set cancers and dense breast tissue. So, all in all, there is need for much research. Mr. Dr. Ghosh has highlighted that we need to do animal experiments and clinical trials. The major challenge is to rationalize cost. Dr. Ghosh says that for the bright future of nanobots, they have to navigate with the standard nanotechnology ideas and concepts are there, but if the technology is too expensive, the the success will be limited. Such so the challenge is to make a market-friendly adoption and find acceptability among clinicians and patients. Moving on. So, judiciary, we know, is very overwhelmed by pending cases. Official figures go in crores, and this has been very, very detrimental to our nation's growth and the ethos of justice and the legal and fundamental right to speedy justice is derogated by this lag in disposing of cases. Indian courts are facing a huge plethora of pending cases, and the judiciary is structurally trying to alleviate these problems, but we have a long way to go. The study focuses upon the courts of Delhi. The study says that approximately 15.8 lakh cases are pending before lower courts, and almost 35% of them are check bounce cases that are punishable under Section 138 of the Negotiable Instrument Act 1881. So, one third of the cases are of mostly violations under the Negotiable Instrument Act and are mostly dishonoured or bounce checks under Section 138. One third is a large number, and this problem so can be easily elevated through simple steps by by administrative as well as legal aspect by changing these logger jams. The judiciary can Delhi High Court can move further. So the study highlights that more than a third of cases pending in Delhi's courts relate to dishonored or bounce checks. They clog the system with matters that are relatively small ticket but involve lengthy and mostly routine procedures and ultimately end in payment rather than punishment. An initiative to set up 34 digital courts to clear the backlog of cases under the Negotiable Instruments Act last year did not succeed due to a strike by the lawyers. So the study encompasses that is a backlog that needs to be solved by eliminating this one third backlog. The courts will be significantly elevating the whole pending cases logger jam. Last year, 34 digital courts were, were sanctioned by the Delhi High Court, but they failed to, you know, capture the imagination of the advocates and other stakeholders. So what was the problem was that by wholly digitizing the, the courts under the Negotiable Instrument Act and under Section 138, it was encompassed by structural problems. You cannot provide evidence in a video conference case, and the court staff also was very underprepared. They did not know how how the procedure would go under this particular digitization. So it was a conceptually progressive idea by the High Court, but it lacked implementation. A proper implementation was lacking. Thus, the idea that was very positive and but failed to grasp their attention. The issue was not the idea itself, but poor planning and lack of preparation and an unready system. So this is the problem. The Delhi High Court's initiative also failed. So what is the future endeavor? So the reform that are needed is that we have three major components. First, to reduce oral submissions, adjournments. So this encompasses that Section 138 procedure that is highlighted in the NI Act must be elevated by reducing the procedure. The stringent procedure can be amended such that it can the evidence and the whole procedure that a normal criminal case undergoes must be highly elevated. The Section 138, though treated as a crime, dishonoring of check is treated as a crime, can also be gone through certain aspects of the criminal civil procedure code. So structural amendments in the procedure undergoing Section 138 can be done. Also, reducing oral submissions, adjournments can also contribute in this particular thing. The Mediation Act of 2022 also helped. So, Section 138 can also be amended similarly to mandate mediation before filing of charges under Section 138. And lastly, that this has been a problem of the whole judiciary, not in this particular case only, is that we have to increase the bench capacity. So there are vacancies, but they are not properly filled, and this contributes, in this particular backlog and the whole judicial backlog as well. So we must, increase the bench capacity. So these are such some suggestions that would really help in the long run in elevating the judicial backlog and in the growth of our country. Moving on, India's Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, has announced that India hosting, would be trying to host the 2036 Olympics. It has already, won the 2030 Commonwealth Games hosting rights. It will be held in 2030 in Ahmedabad. and the Indian government is pressing for full strength to host the 2036 Olympics. So Ahmedabad would be the candidate city. India is in competition with Qatar, Turkey, Indonesia, Hungary, and Germany, which want to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 1936 Olympics. The 1936 Olympics were famous for being hosted in Nazi Germany. So India is gearing up. So this also India would be spending a lot much money to host the 2036 Olympics and the 2030 Commonwealth Games. Already Australia, who is a developed economy, you know, opted out in holding the Commonwealth Games, citing uh, uh, an economic backlog on the country, hosting a big set of sporting event is takes a toll on the economic capacity of the country. So Australia has already opted out of hosting the Commonwealth Games. India, but has decided that it would be hosting both the 2030 Commonwealth Games and would also try to gain the rights for hosting 2036 Olympics. So India is now one of the foremost powers, but till now it has not hosted Olympics game yet. So this would be a major landmark, but the government must also take in account the fiscal prudence in conducting such an exercise. So the sports picture in India is a terrible one that everyone knows. China, US, Great Britain, France are big countries in the gaming sporting picture, but India in the last Olympics failed to get even one gold medal. So the Prime Minister has highlighted that reforms must be there to change the ecosystem, and policies such as the National Sports Governance Act and National Sports Governance Act and Hello India Policy 2025 will provide opportunities to the right talent and increase transparency in sports organizations. Also, initiatives like Target Olympic Podium Scheme TOPS are transforming the sports ecosystem in India. So, it is a positive headway for India that would be hosting such large events, but these hosting would only be a facade when India fails to deliver in its sporting sector. Moving on, after Nicholas Maduro was kidnapped by the US, brought to New York to face trial, this has been seen as the United States' return to interventionism. When in 2003, the US Army invaded Iraq, the US Secretary of State Colin Powell remarked, "If you break it, you own it." He was one of the main architects of the Iraq War, which was, cannot be deemed as a failure but as a hypocritical move, and which had no legality and no basis, no logical basis. Even the claims of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq was a blatant lie by the Bush administration. Now, Mr. Trump's attack on Venezuela is seen also as an audacious and hypocritical attack. Trump, a major critic of the US invasion of Iraq, and someone who promised to be a peacemaker when he took office a year ago, has upended that commitment. The president justified the operation as being in line with over 200-year-old foreign policy agenda called the Monroe Doctrine, which declared the Western Hemisphere to be the playground of the United States. So, what is the basis for attack on the nation of Venezuela? This is not a tough question to answer. Venezuela owns one-fifth of the oil reserves, proven oil reserves of Earth. So this is a prime example of America's international dictator type of hegemonistic dictatorship over the free world. So it has once again this in the Iraq war, the oil factor, as you know, tried to be hidden in the chapters of the code weapons of mass destruction. But now Mr. Trump does not want any facade, and he has blatantly said, yes, we are attacking Venezuela because of their oil. Mr. Trump has said that he will try to upend the Venezuelan oil picture. So we will discuss the Monroe Doctrine. Monroe Doctrine, named after American President James Monroe in 1823. This doctrine is one of the most consequential American foreign policy agendas of the last century. It laid out the American opposition to new or expanding European involvement in the Americas after centuries of colonial rule. Progressively, the US extended this tenet to consider South and Central America a strategic backyard that should be under the sphere of American influence. This went on to become a significant element for American foreign policy intervention in the region for decades. It has been criticized for being used as an alibi to justify meddling in Latin America. Please note, between 1898 and 1994, the US government intervened successfully to change governments in Latin America at least 41 times, ostensibly to protect its interests and counter communism. So, the MAGA base does not like this interventionist policy at all, and there has been voices of concern. On the oil picture, so Mr. Trump has called for reviving the Venezuelan oil sector, but this will in reality take years and will cost billions. So Mr. Trump has announced that American major oil companies would pump in billions of dollars to revive the struggling Venezuelan oil industry and fix its broken oil infrastructure. What he didn't say that it will take several years of work, and American oil companies have made no comment yet on such a long-term commitment, billions of dollars and years of management. If we take the assumption that US does succeed in effectively controlling Venezuela's oil industry, so it will potentially be, driving the oil prices to a new low. But this is something that we have to see over the long run. The US sanctions and that constrained exports, a severe economic crisis, and lack of investment in the infrastructure was resulted in insignificant oil production by Venezuela. Also, the policies of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro contributed to the stagnation of the Venezuelan economy. Its large emphasis on the oil sector, doomed its economy from the start. The Middle East, major economies like the Gulf nations, have learned this lesson from Venezuela to move away from only oil-based economic development, but rather investment in other sectors as well, mostly upon human resources. So what this means for India is that India does not, you know, as Venezuela does not produce much oil, India is not a big market for it, and India would unlikely be much impacted from this blatant invasion. The ONGC, Videsh, the overseas investment arm of the ONGC, will try to recover its $500 million stuck dividends from its shareholding in two Venezuelan oil and gas projects. So this may also be an opportunity for the ONGC to, share the Venezuelan oil reserves. So this has marked a new chapter in world history where America has revived its interventionist policy in the Western Hemisphere. Major uprooting of democratic regimes and popular regimes in Latin America has been a historical mandate. Famous killings of Che Guevara has also been highlighted in the red history of Latin America. This would be now a new chapter, and how the US runs Venezuela would be an endeavor with sharp eyes looking for future developments. Moving on, India been a, has pursued one of the world's most ambitious renewable energy transitions, rapidly scaling solar and wind capacity while investing heavily in national transmission corridors to carry green power from resource-rich states like Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Ladakh to major consumption centers. So, India has ensured that the renewable sector and the push for uh, renewable energy has, taken fruit, and India has, commissioned a landmark achievement, you know, creating a heavy renewable energy hub. But there remains a challenge. In the last video edition, we also covered that India has, resolved the supply side of the renewable energy question, but now forming a domestic demand. The demand side of the system is yet to be, you know, borne through, and the effective demand of renewable energy would be the next chapter, the next transition phase, the next problem to be resolved by the policymakers. So Mr. Subramaniam has highlighted that India has become the, the major hub for renewable energy, but now we must find a solution to ensure that this renewable energy uh, goes into the consumption centers, the people who really need it, and this would reflect a dual push for energy transition, equally about generating and evacuating clean power. So the next phase of renewable scale-up would be a structural challenge as the intersection of infrastructure planning, grid operations, and investor confidence is in question. Thus, operational plants can produce electricity but are unable to inject power into the grid when generation is the highest. At the heart of this problem lies the general network access, which defines how much power the interstate transmission system commits to evacuate for a power generator. So the transmission infrastructure takes longer to build than renewable plants. Temporary GNA was designed as a pragmatic bridge. So all in all, there would be institutional coordination and transparency to ensure that India is able to get the renewable energy it generates to its power grid. Renewable commissioning, and transmission readiness must move in close alignment, unlocking green power at scale that will require not only technical rigor but also institutional coordination and transparent decision making so that when capacity is built, it can actually be used. So Mr. Subramaniam has highlighted that yes, we have made the renewable energy, we have it, we have stored it, but the next issue would be how would we transmit it to the people in need. Making renewable energy would be useless if we cannot readily replace it with non-renewable energy like oil and coal. So if the domestic consumer, big city, metropolitan cities like Delhi and Mumbai are not able to, bear the fruit of this landmark achievement, then this exercise is for nothing. So there must be institutional coordination between the state and the center, and there must be a transparency to ensure that India is able to get the renewable energy it generates to its power grid. Moving on, human labor has been one of the things that have been historically and structurally been part of the basic structure of human society. Women's labor has contributed positively and has been the backbone through which modern society has emerged. But there is still uh, a struggle, a problem that it is not accounted properly. A 2023 United Nations report showed that globally women spend 2.8 more hours than men to unpaid care and domestic work, while domestic labor has increasingly entered the public discourse. The emotional and mental labor in sustaining relationships, managing household dynamics, and supporting the well being of others continues to go largely unacknowledged. So, this raises a critical question: what structural and ideological forces render this labor unseen and undervalued? Feminist scholars like such as Isabella Baker, Nancy Fraser, and Shireen Roy have argued that economic and policy priorities have long marginalized care work by framing it as secondary to productive labor traditionally performed by men. Also, there has been a relentless focus on GDP growth and the emphasis on physical infrastructure investment over social infrastructure have all contributed to the systemic devaluation of care related work. These priorities often result in the diversion of public resources away from services that support caregiving such as childcare, elder care, and mental health services. So, this article has highlighted that there must be coordinated efforts to recognize women's labor. They must be accompanied by structural recognition of gendered social relations, wherein men actively participate in and co-shoulder care responsibilities. Moving on, India loses almost 0.4 of its GDP every year to natural disasters. Emerging Asian economies that compromise India, China, and the Asian 11 face an escalating threat from natural disasters that are growing in both frequency and intensity. As we have, the pictures of the tariffs that are being done by the Trump administration, they the figures are likely that they'll dampen the India's real GDP growth by 0.4%. Now, similarly, these natural disasters would also dampen upon zero point 0.4 of India's GDP. So, various graphs and studies have been presented under this article, which shows that disaster occurrences in emerging Asian countries have been, in the recent years, very much taken a uptick. Also, the chart 4 shows that total occurrences of disaster in emerging Asian countries and by type. So, if we compare China, India, China has almost 600 occurrences of disasters, whereas India come closest to 400 of these occurrences. Picture can also be highlighted of Myanmar when it can be correlated with its disaster occurrences. Chart 4 shows that average annual loss due to disasters. The data is depicted as percentage of country's GDP. So Myanmar will have very low occurrences of natural disasters, but its toll on economy is much higher. Similarly, China, which has 1.5 times the natural disaster occurrence, has also almost double of the average annual loss due to disasters in the period of 1990 to 2024. Chart 5 shows the World Risk Index by various countries of the 2025 edition. So, India in the emerging Asian nations is in the second position, and China is at fifth of economies that are at significant risk from natural disasters. So there is a need for you know a climate resilient, a natural disaster resilient economy, that a major chunk of human and economic growth is being nullified by natural disasters. So these charts and figures must be taken in account to form a prudent climate resilient economy. Lastly, today, this article by Mr. Kantha, a former ambassador to China, talks about the year 2025 for China and Indo-China relations. It also depicts what would be the emerging position as to China's position and structural changes that would be there as 2026 begins. As 2026 begins, China presents a paradox, a nation wrestling with economic challenges yet projecting strategic confidence. So, China's economic picture is not very bright as of now. China is going through uh, an economic strain, uh, downturn in this particular business cycle. China's 2025 economic growth was weaker than official figures, about 5%. Domestic demand remained weak, and overbuilt property sector continued to weigh on confidence. The most importantly, deflationary pressures that producer prices in negative territory for 38 consecutive months, sluggish productivity, and tepid corporate profits persisted. Local governments face fiscal stress, limiting stimulus options. Thus, there has been a slowdown in China's economic cycle. Also, the state has reinforced a state-led model. Instead of boosting consumption, it has prioritized on advanced manufacturing, semiconductors, and artificial intelligence, green energy, and dual-use technologies. So, massive industrial policy has been pushed, and the 15th five-year plan from 2026 to 2030 underscores technological self-reliance and supply chain insulation. So there is an inward turn in China's export dependence grows to compensate for weak domestic demand. China's trade surplus crossed $1 trillion in the first 7 months of 2025. So China, the analysts now say that China is now too large to export its way out of slowdown without aggravating global trade tensions. For India, China's advantages in scale, technology, and system wide efficiency and upstream control of critical inputs, rare earths to battery precursors, have not only expanded the trade deficit, but they have expected to exceed 110 billion in 2025. So there is an economic downturn for China, but power dynamics remain most consequential. US China relations under President Trump have been a beam of sweet and sour relation. Under the national security strategy of 2025, China is no longer framed as a systematic rival, but primarily as an economic competitor. The Indo Pacific is no longer the strategic center of gravity for the United States. Rather, the Western Hemisphere, under the Monroe Doctrine, has taken precedence, reflecting a more inward looking America First approach. But also, the Trump Xi Jinping meeting in South Korea's Busan in October produced de escalation, including modest tariff adjustment and a selective easing of export controls. Also, these were structural bargains, not steps towards a positive trade relationship. For India's, the implications are sobering, as the long positive trajectory of the Indian-US partnership has been disturbed by friction over trade, Russia and Pakistan, in context of the United States. So, what it means for India's China relationship, as the writer highlights, that India-China relation in 2025 witnessed cautious stabilization but no substantive progress on structural issues. Summit level meetings in Shenzhen and other high level exchanges helped rebuild a damaged relationship, yet the situation along the border remains stable but not normal. Disengagement has been accompanied not by de escalation or de induction. So, buffer zones are continue to restrict India's patrolling rights and grazing access. Also, China's tactical outreach to Pakistan in the Operation Sindoor. It works on a massive hydrogen power project in Tibet near the border on the Zangpo River. Also, denial of rare earth magnets, delays in clearing key components, and repeated efforts to flag territorial claims in Arunachal Pradesh has been negative signals and negative signals as well as uh, downturn in the facade of positive relations. So China is likely to persist with the current strategy, manage competition with the US, stabilization of major relationship along with hardball diplomacy. For the Indian government, it must pursue calibrated engagement to reduce immediate risk while strengthening asymmetric deterrence and accelerating domestic technological and industrial capabilities. So this would be all for today. Thank you for joining today's session. Thank you.